Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take your sources, articles, research, whatever you've got, and really dig in to find those key insights.
That's right. We cut through the noise to get you the core information fast.
And today, we've got a good one, a really interesting bit of research.
Yeah, we're diving into a peer-reviewed paper from 2010. It's called Influence of Electrical Stimulation Frequency on Skeletal Muscle Force and Fatigue. Sounds a bit technical, maybe?
A little, but the question it asks is fundamental if you're interested in electrical muscle stimulation, or ES.
Exactly. How does the frequency, like the number of electrical pulses per second, affect your muscles?
Okay, let's jump right in, because the main finding here really goes against what you might instinctively think. You'd probably assume more zaps per second, a higher frequency means stronger contractions, better results, right?
That's the logical assumption, yeah. More stimulation, more force.
But, and this is the fascinating part, this paper shows that while higher frequency does give you more force initially, it also makes your muscles get tired way, way faster, like drastically faster.
It really flips the script on how you might think about using ES effectively.
Totally. It changes the whole calculation for training or, recovery.
Exactly. And, speaking of understanding the science behind the tools we use, getting to grips with studies like this is just so important.
Right.
It's this kind of science that helps you understand how things like, say, EMS devices actually work and how to use them best. You might have come across Oriems Fit, for instance. They're an Australian brand really known for their quality wellness products. Well, understanding this kind of research frequency, fatigue is key to getting real benefits from technologies like theirs. We'll kind of circle back to how this all connects as we go deeper.
Good point. So our mission today really nailed down how ES frequency changes muscle force and fatigue. And then the big question, what does that actually mean for using ES in the real world? Sports, rehab, general wellness. What's the practical advice here?
Okay, let's set the scene a bit. ES, electrical stimulation. Basically, using electrical pulses through pads on your skin to make a muscle contract without you consciously doing it.
And the paper mentions it's used a lot in physical therapy and rehab.
Yeah, for a long time, but also more broadly now in training for healthy folks, helping people who have muscle weakness from conditions like COPD, heart issues, stroke recovery, even just aging.
Right. And one big plus is you can get pretty intense muscle work without hammering your heart and lungs like intense regular exercise might, which is obviously good for certain people.
Definitely a key benefit. But there's a catch the paper highlights straight away.
Ah, okay. What's the catch?
Fatigue. ES-induced contractions, they can tire muscles out much more intensely than when you contract them voluntarily yourself.
Why is that?
Well, the paper points out it's largely because the electrical pulse just hits all the nerve fibers and muscle fibers at once, synchronously. Your brain, when you move normally, is smarter. It recruits fibers more gradually, rotates them, spreads the load.
Ah, okay. So the ES is like flipping a switch for everything at once, while the brain is more like conducting an orchestra.
That's a great way to put it. And that everything at once leads to faster burnout, faster fatigue.
And people already suspected frequency played a role in this fatigue, right?
Yeah, there was this general idea that higher frequencies seem to cause more fatigue. Maybe somewhere around 80 to 100 hertz pulses per second was optimal for force. Though some thought lower, maybe 60 hertz, might be better for those endurance-type muscle fibers.
So what was unique about this study then? What gap were they trying to fill?
They wanted to really measure that force and fatigue across different frequencies, but using a really common ES protocol, this 20-minute session idea, and critically doing it at intensities high enough to actually be relevant for building strength.
Ah, so not just gentle pulses, but proper strength level stuff.
Exactly. They felt that link hadn't been properly studied with a common protocol at those higher intensities.
Okay, makes sense. So how do they set it up? The nuts and bolts?
Right. They had 26 healthy adults participate, and they focused on the quadriceps femoris muscle.
The big one on the front of the thigh.
Yep. Really important for movement and easy to isolate for testing.
Okay. And the protocol?
It was a 20-minute session. During that 20 minutes, they delivered 60 contractions. Each one was 5 seconds of stimulation.
5 seconds off.
Followed by 15 seconds of rest,
Okay.
repeated 60 times.
Got it. 5 on, 15 off, 60 times. And the frequencies?
They tested 3 levels, 100 hertz, which is pretty high, 50 hertz, kind of medium, and 20 hertz, quite low.
And intensity. Did everyone get the same zap level?
No, they dialed it up to the maximal tolerable intensity for each individual person. What was interesting was that the level people could tolerate was actually pretty similar across those 3 different frequencies.
So they were hitting the muscle hard, regardless of frequency, aiming for that strength training zone.
That was the goal. They wanted it to be intense enough to be meaningful for strength.
Maximal tolerable.
Yeah.
I bet that felt pretty intense. Did the different frequencies feel different? Was pain a factor?
The paper does mention pain, yeah. It seems it could be more of a limiting factor, especially at the lower frequencies. It might have made it harder to really push the force up super high at 20 hertz, just due to discomfort compared to the higher frequencies, but they standardized everything else.
Like how they were positioned.
Exactly. They had people sitting, strapped into a special chair, legs at specific angles, all designed to measure the maximum force from the quads accurately and consistently.
Right. Okay. Standardized setup, intense stimulation, different frequencies. What did they actually measure then to track the force and fatigue?
2 main things. First, the person's own voluntary strength. They measured maximal voluntary contraction, MVC, basically, how hard you could tense your quad yourself.
Before the session started.
Baseline MVC. And then again, right at the end, after the 20-minute ES session finished, to see if the ES protocol itself had tired out their ability to contract the muscle voluntarily.
Okay, that makes sense. And the force from the ES itself?
They measured that too, called it FES force from electrical stimulation. They measured it right at the beginning, the very first contraction, then again at the very end, the 60th contraction. And crucially, they also checked it partway through after 15 contractions, so about 5 minutes in, and after 30 contractions, 10 minutes in.
So they could track the decline during the session.
Precisely. And they expressed all these FES measurements as a percentage of that initial voluntary strength, the MVC they measured at the start. Makes it easier to compare.
Okay, got all that. So the moment of truth. What did they find? What were the headline results?
Well, the findings are pretty stark, actually. Let's start with the initial force, the strength of that very first ES contraction.
Okay.
No big surprise here, really. Higher frequency produced higher initial force.
So 100 hertz gave the biggest initial kick.
Yep. At 100 hertz, that first contraction reached about 71% of the person's max voluntary strength. At 50 hertz, it was lower, around 62%. And down at 20 hertz, it was the lowest, about 55%. And these differences were significant.
Okay, so high frequency wins for immediate power. But you mentioned fatigue. That's where it gets interesting, right?
That's exactly where the story flips. When they looked at the force produced by the end of the 20-minute session, after all 60 contractions, wow, the fatigue was way, way worse at the higher frequencies.
How much did the force actually drop by then?
It was quite dramatic. For the 100 hertz group, that force output plummeted from the initial 71% all the way down to just 27% at their starting voluntary strength.
Whoa. From 71% down to 27%. That's a massive drop.
Huge. More than 2/3 of the force just gone. At 50 hertz, it also dropped significantly, from 62% down to 33%, still a big drop.
Okay.
And at 20 hertz, the force still dropped. It was significant, but it held up much better. It finished at around 38% of the initial MVC.
So 20 hertz started lowest, but actually finished relatively strongest because it didn't fatigue nearly as much.
You got it. The fatigue effect was significantly less severe at 20 hertz compared to 100 hertz, and also less than 50 hertz by the end.
And did they see when this fatigue really cooked in?
Yeah, that's the other key part. Remember, they measured after 15 contractions about 5 minutes in?
Right.
By that point, the high frequencies were already tanking. At 100 hertz, force was already down to about 60% of MVC. At 50 hertz, down to 53%. But at 20 hertz, still holding relatively steady around 51%. No significant drop yet after 5 minutes.
So that really bad fatigue isn't something that gradually builds over 20 minutes. At 100 hertz, it hits hard and fast within the first 5 minutes.
Hits really hard, really fast. And there was that other finding, too, about voluntary strength after the session.
Oh, yeah, the MVC measurement at the end. What happened there?
Even the ability to voluntarily contract the muscle was reduced more after the high-frequency session. After the 100 hertz protocol, people could only contract their quad at about 71% of their original baseline strength.
So the ES section tired them out that much.
Yeah. Whereas after 50 hertz, their MVC was down to 86%, and after 20 hertz, it was 89%. So less impact on their voluntary ability afterwards with the lower frequencies.
That 100 hertz session really did a number on the muscle then, short term.
It shows just how profound that fatigue can be with that kind of high-frequency repetitive stimulation.
Okay, results are clear. High frequency. Strong start, quick burnout. Low frequency. Weaker start, lasts longer. So what did the paper say about why this happens and what it all means?
They pointed to a couple of main reasons for that faster fatigue at 100 hertz. First, basic energy use. High frequencies make the muscle fibers burn through their fuel, ATP, much, much faster.
Revving an engine really high just burns through gas.
Exactly. Just consumes energy at a much higher rate. Second, and this is really interesting, they linked it to the types of muscle fibers being activated.
Ah, the fast twitch versus slow twitch thing.
Precisely. Higher frequencies, like 100 hertz, tend to preferentially recruit those fast twitch or type 2 fibers. They're powerful, great for sprinting or jumping, but they gas out really quickly. Lower frequencies, like 20 hertz, even though they produce less peak force, tend to activate more of the slow twitch or type I fibers. These are your endurance fibers, more resistant to fatigue.
So high frequency calls up the sprinters who burn out fast. Low frequency gets the marathon runners involved who can keep going longer.
That's a perfect analogy for it. Yeah.
Okay, so that explains the fatigue difference. How did they connect this back to actual training goals, like building strength?
Well, they brought up the generally accepted idea that for effective strength training, your muscle contractions need to be pretty intense, usually above about 60% of your maximal voluntary capacity, your MVC.
Right, you need to challenge the muscle significantly. So did any of these frequencies keep the muscle working above that 60% threshold for very long?
Well, here's the rub. Only the 100 hertz frequency started comfortably above that 60% mark, remember, at 71%?
Right.
But because it fatigued so quickly, it dropped below that 60% threshold after only about the first 15 contractions. So after the first 5 minutes or so.
Oh, so most of the 20-minute session at 100 hertz was actually below the intensity needed for optimal strength gains.
According to their findings and that 60% rule of thumb, yes. 50 hertz started around 62%, so just barely above, and dropped below almost immediately. And 20 hertz started at 55%, so it was generally below that threshold from the beginning.
And you mentioned pain, maybe limiting the intensity people could tolerate at 20 hertz. Did that play a role in it not hitting the 60%?
They suggest it likely did. The discomfort might have prevented them from cranking the intensity high enough on the machine to push the actual muscle force above 60% MVC, even though the muscle itself wouldn't fatigue as quickly at that frequency. Kind of a catch-22.
Yeah, so you're stuck, high force, but you tire out instantly. Or less fatigue, but maybe not enough force for strength gains, potentially limited by comfort.
That seems to be the trade-off this study highlights with that specific protocol.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what were the paper's main conclusions for practical application? How should people think about using different frequencies?
Based on these results, they suggested that a high frequency like 100 hertz could be useful if your main goal is achieving really high maximal force contractions, maybe for elite athletes doing explosive power work.
BT, big butt.
You absolutely have to be aware of and account for that incredibly rapid fatigue. Short bursts might be okay, but long sessions are counterproductive for force.
Okay, and what about the lower end, the 20 hertz?
That looked potentially better suited for things like muscle rehabilitation or maybe preventing muscle wasting, atrophy, situations where maintaining some level of contraction for a longer duration is more important than hitting peak force and where minimizing fatigue is key.
Right, endurance over power. Match the frequency to the specific goal. But what about that 20-minute 60 contraction protocol itself? The one they actually tested.
Yeah, this is probably the single biggest practical takeaway. The paper flat out states that this kind of common 20-minute continuous stimulation protocol, it's likely not appropriate if your goal is building strength.
Not appropriate because of the fatigue.
Exactly, because even at 100 hertz, the only frequency that started strong enough, the muscle fatigued so quickly that it spent most of the 20 minutes working below the intensity needed for strength adaptation. You're just inducing massive fatigue without the strength stimulus for most of the session.
Wow. That really challenges a potentially common way of using ES devices.
It absolutely does. It suggests that just doing long sessions might feel like you're doing a lot, but you could be hitting diminishing returns very, very quickly, and mostly just exhausting the muscle without the desired training effect.
Did they suggest a better way then, if the 20-minute slog isn't ideal for strength?
They floated a hypothesis really, that needed more testing. They wondered if maybe a protocol using shorter, repeated bursts of intense stimulation might work better.
How would that look?
For example, maybe doing 4 short sessions, each with only 15 contractions, so about 5 minutes of stimulation time, but separated by, say, 10 minutes of rest in between.
So breaking it up, intense work, recover, intense work, recover.
Exactly. The thinking is you might be able to keep the intensity high, above that 60% threshold, during those short bursts when the muscle is fresher, and the rest periods would allow some recovery, potentially leading to a better overall strength stimulus compared to one long, fatiguing session.
That makes intuitive sense.
Yeah.
Hit it hard, rest, repeat rather than grind it out.
Seems logical, but they were careful to say it needs more research to confirm if that's actually superior.
Still, it's a total shift in thinking about how to structure ES for strength.
Hmm.
Not just volume, but intensity bursts and recovery.
It really is. And you know what's so striking here? This study just hammers home how vital it is to understand the actual science behind these technologies, like ES.
Right.
Knowing how something like frequency dramatically changes the outcome, especially fatigue. It's not intuitive, is it? But it's crucial for using these tools effectively. It's not just about owning a device, it's about knowing how it interacts with your body based on the settings. And that's exactly why resources like, for instance, the Oriems Fit Research Digest are so valuable. They take peer-reviewed science, like this paper, and they distill it down into something clear and understandable so you can actually use that knowledge.
Makes the science accessible.
Totally. And speaking of Oriems Fit, it actually gives you confidence when you see a brand committed to that kind of transparency. It's probably part of why they're nationally awarded. You know, they won Best Product of the Year from productreview.com.au, actually 2 years running.
Wow, okay. That does suggest a focus on quality and presumably effectiveness, which relies on understanding this kind of science.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, their Research Digest blog always links back to the original study, so if you want to go super deep like we just did, you can trace it right back to the source.
Nice. Okay, so let's try and sort of pull all these threads together from our deep dive today.
Okay, so key takeaways from this Joy Body paper. Frequency in electrical stimulation is a huge factor. It significantly changes both how much force your muscle produces initially and how quickly it fatigues.
Right. High frequency, like 100 hertz, gives you that strong initial contraction.
But leads to really rapid and severe fatigue, kicking in within just a few minutes.
Whereas lower frequency, like 20 hertz, starts with less force.
But the muscle fatigues much more slowly, allowing for more sustained activity, although maybe not hitting peak force levels.
And crucially, that common 20-minute continuous stimulation protocol they tested. Based on this research, it looks pretty ineffective for building strength because fatigue sets in too fast, dropping the intensity below optimal levels for most of the session.
Yeah, which led the authors to suggest that maybe shorter, high-intensity bursts with rest periods in between might be a better strategy for strength goals, though that needs more investigation.
So here's something to think about. Knowing how profoundly frequency affects fatigue, does this research make you reconsider how you might use or think about using electrical stimulation, whether it's for fitness or rehab or just general muscle health?
It really highlights that just turning a device on isn't enough. The settings, the protocol, they matter immensely depending on what you're trying to achieve. More isn't always better, and maybe timing those bursts is key.
Definitely food for thought. If this deep dive into the science has got you curious and you want to learn more, we definitely recommend checking out the Oriems Fit Research Digest. They have more simplified breakdowns of solid studies like this one.
And you'll find links back to the original papers there too. Plus, you can explore Oriems Fit's range of wellness products on their website. They've built quite a community, tens of thousands globally, who trust their quality. Just remember, it's about wellness insights and quality products, not making specific medical claims.
Absolutely. We really enjoy digging into the science like this for you. If you found this valuable, please do consider commenting, sharing it with someone who might be interested, and following us wherever you listen. It helps us keep these deep dives going.
Thanks for tuning in.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.